The idea of using one's own body to combat certain medical conditions has seen the expansion of an exciting new area of medicine. One company at the forefront of this move is 4D Pharma. It's benefited from its high-profile treatment trials for Covid-19, but the company also has interests in a number of other areas, from asthma through to cancer. The chief executive of 4D Pharma is Duncan Peyton. He joins us now. Duncan, good to catch up with you again. We spoke to you at the back end of August when you had some good news for the market. I noticed in the last few days or so, there's been a little bit of pressure for the shares. We'll take a look at those in just a minute. I want to ask you, though, first of all, to identify what's been going on with the company, because I know all this came around the time of the release of news about the irritable bowel syndrome drug that you've got on trial. What's been going on?
Correct, Chairman. It's good to see you again. Well, we got the trial results, and we saw quite a sharp downward pressure on the share price. And whilst it's quite confusing because we're really excited by what we see. And I think for the first time, if you're an IBS patient, you can go to a clinician, you can go to your primary care clinician and get a treatment that covers both C and D, IBS C and D, and it does that safely. Whereas at the minute, you have to go to your GP, then you have to get referred to a gastroenterologist, go and see a specialist, and then try and get the disease defined and diagnosed. Whereas what we see with Blautix, from the data that we're seeing a drug that works in both C and D. It's safe. So it's, potentially a first-line treatment for IBS, which will be, we think, really change how people look at the disease and treat the disease.
So what about the market reaction then? Let's bring the share price in. You referenced this drop that we'd seen. In fact, I think actually its worst point, it was about the 30% loss. Clearly, there has been a really big rise for this stock. And in fact, pre-COVID, we've spoken to you about this before, you were trading at around about 24, 25 pence a share. At the recent highs, I think there was something like a 2-year high, 171 pence, but then came this drop. What was it that people were fixated on in terms of what they didn't hear from you about this? Were they being prompted earlier on before the release of the news to expect something really big and it didn't come? Or what was it that you felt that there was the reason for this sell-off?
It's a really good question, and I can only give you my opinion. And we saw some fantastic results with oncology, results that really far exceeded our expectation. And with the IBS results, we've still seen positive results. The results, didn't meet the endpoint, but it was never meant to be a pivotal trial. We were here to understand how we can use the results we've got to develop a pivotal trial. So, the results are positive. It's like an analogy would be, Usain Bolt goes to the Olympics, gets a gold medal, but doesn't get a world record. And I think that's the sort of reaction that we've seen. We think it's really positive. The clinicians we've spoken to think it's really positive. It hasn't met what the market expected.
Where are you going to go with this now? What are the next stages in these trials?
Well, we've got the data. We've got the first cut of the data. What we've seen for the first time ever a drug that looks like it addresses both IBS-C and IBS-D. So that's a real positive, because at the minute drugs can only address either of the symptoms, either the constipation or the diarrhea. So we'll look at that data. We'll look at the data, for example, in terms of the improvement in bowel habits is really strong, very significant, which is actually, if you're an IBS patient, particularly if you're an IBS-D patient, you suffer from chronic diarrhea, that's something that's really important to you and will improve your life. So we'll look at all these data points, we'll slice it down, and that will help us develop a larger scale pivotal trial. And I think that's the next core step in the development of Blautix.
And the costs involved in doing this, are you having to draw down quite a lot in terms of money to pay for these trials? Where are you on the balance sheet for the support of these trials in terms of your financial commitment?
Yeah, well, we raised some money back in September, and the balance sheet is looking strong. It's looking positive. I think in terms of developing the next set of these trials, particularly for Blautix, we'll look at that. The trial that we've done was quite a small trial. It was about 300 people. If you look at the approval trials that are done in IBS, they're much bigger. They're about 3 times the size. So we'll look at costing that. We'll look internally how we want to do it. We'll also speak to potential partners as well and see if we can partner this particular project out.
When we last spoke at the back end of August, you were then talking about the successful trials of the cancer drug that you got in process. It goes by the wonderful name of MRX-0518. It always amazes me the sort of technical names that you guys come up with. Not you, but the profession generally. When these drugs go through trials, they have the most unbelievably difficult to remember names. Just tell us about what's happening with that, because as I said in August, there was particularly good news about this MRX-0518.
One of the strengths of 4D Pharma, it's not just about a single drug or a single analog of a drug. We've got multiple programs running at different phases of development, whether that be in discovery, preclinical work, or actually in the clinic. And 518 is one of those drugs. So we had the great results over the summer period. We saw a 44% response in terms of, and we're expecting around about 10%. So we're really encouraged by what we saw there, as were the clinicians. We've opened more sites now, so we've got all the sites up and running. We've got an additional 4 sites to recruit more patients. The recruitment's now strong. The message is getting out about 518. So we're looking at how we can take the results that we've got and the results that we're gathering and expanding that into looking how we can get that into an approval study. And that's the core next step for 518. And clearly over the coming months, we're coming into conference season. So we'll start speaking about the results that we've seen in that trial and potentially other trials in the oncology space as well.
Yeah. And finally, just to round things off, when looking at some of the companies that have been front on in terms of COVID, 4D Pharma comes up quite often because you've got these trials underway. I know that you have a drug that I think actually I'm right in saying, aren't I, that was it previously an asthma drug? I think it was, that's become something in the COVID space that you're trying to test on now for some sort of way in trying to mitigate the effects of COVID-19. How are those trials going? Because again, in the summer when we spoke to you, you felt then it was difficult to find candidates. Since we've spoken to you, we know that there's been this uplift in patients admitted to hospital. Certainly a great number of people now have COVID-19. I know testing's gone up. Are you finding it easier now to find candidates for the trials for COVID-19?
I mean, you're absolutely right. MRX4 is a drug that treats the hyperinflammation in the lung, which is one of the problems that we see in COVID. People just can't breathe, and they need oxygen and they need respirators. And we know this drug's safe from the work we've also done in asthma, as you rightly pointed out. In terms of the development of the trials, the trials open at the minute, but what we're still seeing at this point in time, even though the hospital rates are increasing, the government and Matt Hancock are pushing patients into the government-sponsored recovery trial, which is using existing drugs, either whether they be the antivirals from Regeneron or looking at plasma. So it's still difficult to get the patients through. But we still strongly believe in terms of the safety aspect. You could give this drug to patients as they come into hospital, damp down the hyperinflammation in the lung, and negate the need for ventilation or oxygen, or actually the more aggressive drugs such as dexamethasone. So we still think there's a strong case for our drug, and we'll just keep pushing to try and get patients through that trial.
Okay, well, good luck with that. And of course, as I said, it's a very high-profile drug. Just to quickly reference the share price again, if I can, and round up with one final question. At £1 a share, what is being priced in here? It's very difficult for companies in your position where you've got drugs in trial. You know some of them work in some situations, as you were just saying, for the COVID treatment, which is already out in the asthma field. What is it that's being priced at these levels? What do you say to investors who are sort of dancing around the idea of investing in the stock of 4D at £1? What is the future looking like for shareholders?
I think the future for shareholders looks fantastic. If you just look at the cancer program alone, that program, on the field of immune oncology is one of the fields which is going to grow significantly over the next decade. And we're right at the forefront of making checkpoint inhibitors potentially more effective, but also 518 works as a monotherapy as well. So we've got a real, push into that field, and, we're addressing the big problems in terms of what's happening in immune oncology. Behind that, we're looking at neurodegeneration. We've seen some fantastic preclinical results in neurodegeneration, and we're getting prepared to take those into the clinic. And then, behind that, we've got we're looking at autoimmune diseases such as Crohn's and colitis. We've got the respiratory programs in asthma and COVID. And then, we've just had a fantastic result in IBS. And if you just think about that for a second, you've got a drug which we know is safe in Blautix, our IBS product, which for the first time addresses both B and C. So I think that the future looks fantastic for 4D Pharma. I think, as we progress through, we continue to prove out the space. We continue to prove our science. We're seeing a lot of translation from the research labs into the clinic now, which I just sort of goes to strengthen the resolve and the belief and the science that we have behind live biotherapeutics, which is, behind the success of 4D Pharma.
Oh, look, we wish you all strength to your arm on the developments of these drugs, because clearly they will potentially make a big difference to people. And I know that with other pharmaceutical companies, you're doing great work. But thanks indeed for joining us, Duncan. It's great to talk to you. Duncan Peyton is Chief Executive of 4D Pharma. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter @IGTV and subscribe to our YouTube channel.